Hi, I'm Pam Bailey. Welcome to Voices Unlocked, a podcast produced by More Than Our Crimes, a nonprofit that's dedicated to bringing voices inside federal prison out to the world so that their humanity can be seen and heard. And today we have a couple of new voices, two in the podcast studio. And one of them is Conrad Stewart, who recently was released from federal prison himself. And I'd like to, before we go on, have Conrad introduce himself a little bit.
Hello, my name is Michael Conrad Stewart. I did 26 years incarcerated in the Federal Bureau of Prisons. I was released February 7th, 2022 from an IRA. I was an IRA recipient. And I'm just glad to be here, be able to give my voice to the conversation.
Well, I sort of want to explain. So Conrad just mentioned IRA. And, More Than Our Crimes is dedicated to advocating for second chances, an opportunity for people who've been in prison for a long time to show that they're rehabilitated and are ready to return to their communities and families. And IRA is actually a DC law that is an example of how to do that. Basically, what IRA says is the Incarceration Reduction Amendment Act. And it says that if you've been in prison for at least 15 years and you went in under the age of 25, you have the opportunity to go before a judge and demonstrate how you've changed and developed, and you can return home. And this is the kind of law that we want to advocate for everywhere. And in fact, we'd also like to change the age requirement because really anybody who has committed a crime, 15, 20, 25 years before has changed and developed, and we believe has the right to hope. But what's sort of making that the advocacy for second chances a little bit difficult right now is that in DC and a lot of other cities across the country, crime, including violent crime, is spiking and has spiked really since the pandemic. And so you have a lot of people who are very afraid, rightfully so. I understand it. On my own block in DC, for instance, there was a carjacking literally almost in front of my apartment building. So people are afraid, and that makes it harder to have conversations about why people who have committed crimes deserve the opportunity for a second chance. And we have another new voice in the podcast studio today, and that's Nana Duffier. And she actually is founder of Sound Easy, which is the producer for Voices Unlocked. But she also has an interesting personal story that will give her, I think she'll play a very valuable role in this conversation today about how to bridge the divide between two types of hurt people, those who commit crimes and those who are impacted by them. Nana, you going to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Nana Duffier. Pam, thank you for saying my name so eloquently and gracefully. My Ghanaian name. I am, as Pam mentioned, founder of Sound Easy. I am a yogi. I am a Reiki. I am an energy healer. I am someone who believes in justice and human rights and civil rights and goodness and welfare for all. That's very important to me. And my story is one of being a widow, essentially. My husband, as you know, Pam and Conrad, was murdered in 2006. He was a wonderful man. His name was Lasana Jawara. He was driving a taxi cab. He was a taxi cab driver at the time, an immigrant, 28 years old, from Mali in West Africa, a very kind and gentle soul, and someone who was really in this country just to make it, like all of us. Some of us have been here, who were born here and who have, you know, generations of history in this country, and others who are more recent Americans or immigrants, and he was on the road to becoming an American, to live a dream which involved freedom for him because he came from quite a well-to-do family in Mali, but a family that had a lot of rules and regulations around your future. Very conservative, very, very, very conservative family. Your wife and your husband are chosen for you. Your career path typically is chosen for you. You wind up In his case, working within the family business, the family structure, which was natural gas for him. And he left what would have been a comfortable life to come to the United States to actually wind up living a very difficult life. He toiled as an undocumented immigrant, as a very young man at the time when he came here. I think he was still a teenager, in his early teens, but he was able to come on a university visa. He was accepted to Cal State, California State University, and he um, very quickly learned from his father that he was going to have to pay back every red cent that his father invested in him coming to the United States. And that hurt him so badly. And it really set him on a rampage, really. It really drove him to hurry up and pay his dad back. He did not want to owe his father. And so he left school as a result, and he started working. And that was one of the choices that he made that I won't say it was a good choice or was a bad choice, but it was definitely a turning point
Yeah.
in his life here. That's where he started to struggle, just to make ends meet. And a lot of people are familiar with the life of an undocumented person. In some ways, may be similar to a life of a formerly incarcerated person, right? Where you're running up against a lot of barriers, a lot of legal barriers, job applications, documentation, all that kind of stuff. So he's doing a lot of odd jobs and just trying to find a way and trying to find a community that would accept him and that would help to facilitate his journey. And one thing about him, he was a devout Muslim through and through. He was a gentle man of peace. And so, anyway, long story short, he wound up driving a taxi. We met in late 2004. And it was pretty much love at first sight. We met on Christmas Day in a club. We were both in a club on Christmas Day. That's another story. And we dated for about a year and a half. We moved in together in February of 2006. We got married in April of 2006. And on May 31st, 2006, he was murdered. So it was a very, needless to say, turbulent, devastating event in my life, my family's life, his family's life.
Was this like a random act of violence?
This was a random act of
He didn't know
violence.
the person.
This was a random act of violence. He did not know the person. It was a 15-year-old young man, boy, child, that killed him in a robbery. The young man who was apprehended in the aftermath of this on the same day was captured. He was brought in, and eventually there was a plea deal that
Mhm.
that
Well,
came up.
in most cases, that happens.
Yeah, they convinced him to plea. He had just been released from a juvenile um, detention for breaking and entering, and maybe not more than a month prior to this happening. And so that was taken into consideration, and he wound up being charged as an adult, although he was 15 years old when he did this. And then he became 16, and we were in the court system trying to figure out what's going to happen to this person who killed my husband. And so through the plea, he was given 34 years um, of a sentence for his actions. And the assistant DA told me that more than likely he'd do about 17 if all goes well for him, right? It's looking like maybe 17 is what he'll do and then he'll be out. Here we are at year 17. I haven't heard anything, but I also haven't followed up. I haven't followed up. I've been very much living my life and uh, working through my own trauma as a result of this, and on a course of healing. This is why I'm such a dedicated yogi, and I've become a Reiki, and healing and self-discovery and um, ascension of my own spirit and of my own course in life has really been my focus, not on the young person who killed my husband, carrying through my husband's legacy, and just everything I do, everything I say, every action I take, I still feel like I'm married to him, even though he's not here, because I don't believe that we die in the soul. Of the soul, I think we just die of the flesh. And so I still feel very much attached to him, very much a part of him. And much of what I do is of the consciousness that he's aware of things. He's near me, he's by me. I want to make sure that his life was not cut short at the age of 28 in vain. And I want to make sure that the way I carry myself, especially for those who knew him and who know me and know us and associate us with one another, that I conduct myself and I carry myself and I involve myself in things that he would have done or he would be proud of. I represent him in this life still.
So it seems to me that so this is our challenge, really. If we look at the moment in time that we're at, where we have, on the one hand, rising crime, which is a major concern, and we have a culture that has resulted in mass incarceration. Large numbers of people who are serving long periods of time in prison, predominantly black. So you have these two opposing wrongs. You know, and one of the blog posts that More Than Our Crime is published, and we talked about one of our previous episodes, is that hurt people hurt people.
Mhm.
So very often, we as a society don't ask too much about the why behind this 15-year-old, for instance. How did he get to that point? And often, if you really delve into their stories, I mean, we were just hearing earlier from Conrad about his, you'll find that the person who commits the crime came from really damaged, traumatic childhoods. So it's like a hurt person is often the one who hurts another. And I think our challenge is, how do we build a bridge of understanding and healing between those two communities so we could address this together? And that's what this episode is about. And we're going to be hearing later from somebody still in prison who's grappling with these questions. But Conrad, I would love to hear some of your thoughts when you're listening to Nana about how do we
Bridge the
bridge,
gap.
because you're coming from two different sides here.
Right. And I just truly believe that when it comes to these particular hurt people, this is a fact, right? I can't deny the fact that when I came up and when I was young, I got desensitized to violence very young. Unfortunately, I had watched my father shoot my mother at an early age. So when you're dealing with a young child mind and he's watching it and he's seeing how the world works in his small mind of how, okay, this is how I solve my issues, right? If he see his mother and his father arguing, he say, "Oh, I so now violence become prevalent to this young child at a very, especially me, at a very young age." So when you become desensitized, then you take the humanity out of the equation. But as I was listening um, to the sister, I was listening to her explain the situation. The first thing that popped out to my mind, she's saying how this young youth was already taken into the custody of the juvenile detention center. So I'm saying, so the first thing popped in my mind, why wasn't he given the proper guidance and protection then? Like even for me, when I was in the Oak Hill facility, which is in DC, for youth, is now New Beginnings. But when I went down there, I already knew in my mind that this wasn't the type of life I wanted to live. I didn't want to have nobody telling me when to wake up, when to go to sleep, and and how to live my life. However, I didn't have the guidance. I didn't even have the education. When I went to prison at the age of 18, I was a functional illiterate. That doesn't mean that I was dumb or I had a innate ability to be evil or mean. No, that just means I was underdeveloped and I didn't have the proper guidance to be a productive member of society or a citizen. So what I understand now is that we have to go back to the root cause a lot of these crimes, and just having this healing process between the both ends of the spectrum is very pivotal and is very critical. And we should not only speak about it, but these are things we should start now trying to develop policy around, right? And really get those who represent us, which is the politicians, get them to really listen. And that's another way we use our voice through voting and things of that nature. So for me, I just see the bridging of the gap is the communication.
Mhm.
right? The understanding the humanity behind the tragedy. And for me, it just took years of a lot of self correction, self analysis, and self development. And but this was only possible because I had reached that level where I stopped giving onus to my actions to others. I took onus of it and say, hey, I'm a functioning illiterate, so that means I need to educate myself. That means I need to be in halls where knowledge is being disseminated, where I can evolve and grow as a human being. So, I understand the emotions of when a tragedy happened, how this notion of revenge and, this fury and this anger, it takes over the individual. However, you got to get back to the root because now, as we're seeing now, it's a cycle. I came in '96. It was the same crime wave. So here it is now, what, 2022?
Hmm.
We faced with the
Doing it
same.
again.
So whatever we doing is not working,
Mhm.
right? The Gregorian sentences and sentencing people to 20, 30 years, this is not stopping the damage that these young adolescents that find themselves in terrible situations at a young age.
Well, so recently, through a member of the More Than Our Crimes network, um, his name is Ricardo Davis. He's currently serving time in a federal prison in New Jersey called FCI Fairton. And he told me about a class that he is taking, that he took in prison and now is teaching because he found it so helpful, called Victim Impact. And I actually hadn't been aware until he told me about this, that um, uh, there's prisoners inside who have gotten to the point, like you did, of grappling with the impact of what they've done, what the crime they committed on not only their own family, but families like yours and the whole community. And by the way, I should make a point here is that he's teaching the class. This is not prison staff. Very often, you'll hear that the prisoners come together and teach the classes that they need if they're not getting it from the prison itself. So I interviewed Ricardo a little bit about what what does it take to get to the point that you're ready for that kind of a class, because you often aren't when you first go into prison. Now, before we listen to this first soundbite from him, I want you to understand he mentions at one point the first prison he was in, and he mentions it's called Lorton. Well, Lorton was it was a prison for DC residents a long time ago, back in like the 80s.
It
Yeah.
closed down in 2000.
Yeah, so it's
The
closed.
40s.
So now DC residents are sent into the federal system far from home. But what you need to know is that Lorton was extremely violent. So when he talks about Lorton, that you'll understand that context. So let's listen to what he has to say.
When you first come in, you making all type of excuses, modifying a lot of stuff that you did when you was out because you basically blaming everybody else for why you was in or for what you did. That wouldn't have happened to them if they would have just gave the money up or if they would have only got out the way or they were trying to play hero, they wouldn't have got hurt if they wouldn't have got in my way and just let me go. You blaming everybody else when you first come in. You still not at the point where you ready to accept responsibility for your own actions. My first 11 years, I was just still concentrating on doing drugs. Didn't care nothing about myself. And really just was looking for any type of trouble I wanted because I didn't care nothing about myself. But when they closed Lord down, we was locked down a lot. I got to reflect and look at myself and this call is from a federal prison. Look inside internally at myself and start asking questions, you know what I'm saying? And why did I do this? And I was raised up in Southeast Washington. I know right from wrong. I know I did wrong. So that's when I came across the victim impact class.
So, Conrad, we just heard Ricardo talking about this victim impact class. I'm curious, when you were in prison, did you have classes like that, and did you participate? And if not, did you even hear, was that even a discussion about, and I'm sort of curious to add on to that, what would you think about bringing people like Nana inside
Mhm.
to be part of those kinds of discussions or classes?
Wow. Well, fortunately for me, I did take the Victims Impact class. It's a class that's recommended by your counselor. Your counselor do somewhat facilitate the class because it's something that the BOP does require in certain instances. I took the class, very impactful. I took it when I was in Big Sandy. in Kentucky. What's that? Isa, Kentucky.
Inez.
Inez, pardon me, Inez, Kentucky. In 2016, and the class was very impactful for many reasons because the environment, first and foremost, I was in was very hostile environment. So to come out of that and then come into a class of ease and be able to um listen to stories of individual who was impacted by crime. To me, it made me do a lot of uh, self analyzation, sort of, because I do it a lot. And the class is geared towards you understanding the impact and the domino effect of your crime.
Mhm.
So quite naturally for me, I took it to heart. I took it personal, because at no time during this tragedy in my life where my heart wasn't heavy, right? So to understand now, the mother you affected, the father you affected, the daughter, sister, and you see now the impact of it. It kind of make you pause and ask yourself, who am I? Um, so the way it's set up is um, very good. Um, and like I said, it's a requirement in certain instances. They won't even let you transfer without this
So what do you think? I mean,
class.
because the classes obviously are just sort of just prisoners talking amongst each other. What would you think about? I actually had another prisoner suggest this to me, and I thought it was an interesting concept of having people like Nana
Mhm.
go into prison to be part of a class. I know that would be sort of radical, but what do you
No,
think?
no, actually, that's what's needed, right?
Mm.
Because when we talking about bridging the gap, that's how you bridge the gap. We got to hear the anger. You got to hear the emotions, right?
Mm.
This is how change take place, right? It's a saying: if you can't shame a man, then he won't change. But if you want to change a man, shame a man. So out of this shame that I felt, I was changed tremendously. So imagine the ones that I harmed, right? Coming to me, setting me down, showing me how I affected their life.
Mm.
And this is why I move in the circles I'm moving now for effective change, because now I gotta be part of the solution. And this is how this occurred, from dialogue between both ends of the spectrum. And really, because they do have a videotapes and they got a course. It's actually a curriculum that they have that they use in the victims impact class. However, there's nothing like the real thing.
So what do you think about Nana? I mean, I would think that maybe that would be hard.
Hmm.
I mean, it's obviously not the person who did commit the crime
That
against
you have a
you.
direct or
Right,
indirect
but it's
relationship with, yeah.
still yeah, so how would that be too much to ask of somebody who had been victimized?
Ooh, I have a lot to say about this. I have a couple questions too,
Mhm.
for you, Conrad, about it.
Okay.
But I think it really just depends on the person. So I can talk about it generally, and then I'll talk about myself, and then I'll speak about it generally because I think those are two different conversations. For me as an individual, it's not my calling to go in prisons, and at least not now, not as I sit here right now. The reason why is manifold. I'm very busy producing media and working in marketing. I am very much on a path of healing myself still, right? The healing journey is continuous, and I just need what I need to heal, right? And as I mentioned to you last weekend when we were in the spokesperson training, for me, it is important for my healing not to be defined by this moment in time, this
Mhm.
event that happened outside of my husband's control, outside of my own control, for it to hijack my life,
Mhm.
right? I want for my life to continue on, and I've worked really hard to continue on and not to be dragged back into Baltimore courtrooms. And, let's just face it, nobody wants to be in prison, myself included, right? When we were just in the sociology department building, like with the fluorescent lights and all of that, I didn't feel comfortable. I like to be in green spaces. I like to have light. I like to have natural light. So, like, why would I want to be in that space? Like, I'm speaking honestly. Like,
Right.
do I really want to disrupt the the majesty that I'm trying to create from my life, the holistic way that I want to live my life, being around friends and family, laughter, and go into spaces that nobody wants to be in. I don't even know if the correctional officers even want to be there. So that's part of it. I don't know that it's my calling because I'm also very, very empathic. And it's very difficult for me to not take on other people's traumas and to internalize them and for them to become a part of me. I don't watch the news. I don't watch violent television shows. I don't watch anything that has to do with sexual trauma because I internalize it and it re-traumatizes me for all the things I've been through in my life. I have to be very, very, very careful about what I surround myself with and what I expose myself to. And I imagine that other people who've been impacted, especially by violent crimes, whether directly or indirectly, I would say for me it's indirect. I'm not the one who was killed, but
Yeah.
it's still, it's close enough.
Mhm.
Might be in a similar situation where that's the tug of war. Now, my sister, who's a slightly more removed, my sister Sewa, whom you met last weekend, she's different. She's a little bit more removed from it. She's not empathic like myself. She's very much a caring person and somebody who wants change like myself, but she doesn't have that gene where everything causes her trauma. She can watch Unsolved Mysteries on Christmas. I mean, she does. She likes to watch Unsolved Mysteries on Christmas and Thanksgiving, and I'm like, "What you doing?" So she's the one who can go into prisons. And I really enjoyed working with the formerly incarcerated last weekend. I really enjoyed that because we weren't in the prison.
Yeah.
And that's a different kind of work that I think I can do. Now, in general, though, I think that absolutely it's needed. And I think people who have the capacity to be in those spaces should be, because I do believe I felt you, Conrad, when you said it's needed. I felt the emotion behind you saying it's needed. And so I just want to know, I would love for you to explain a little bit more why it's needed. And the second question I have behind that is it, I'm assuming that for someone to even take that class, and again, Pam, I think you, Pam, maybe Ricardo mentioned that people who are in that class, who are teaching the class, are the same people who are in the class. There's no outside facilitator coming in. So if the people who are in the class are learning from one another with no outside facilitation, it makes me feel that you've already arrived to a certain place, right? You've already come to a place of perspective, of understanding, of self transformation. Of course, more work is needed always until the day we leave this planet, but it's already telling me that you already made a lot of inroads on your own or through experiences or epiphanies or prayer or whatever it was. So, why is it that you then need someone like myself to come in? What's the missing piece? And then the other question I have is, if you can remember my questions, is does does the class, do the conversations and the workshopping that you do, does it bring you back to the impact that it has on you, not just on the so-called victims? And I hate that word victim,
Right.
but does it also bring you back to how did this impact me? Because I'm a big believer in everything starts with you.
I say it's necessary because when you talk about closure and healing, it goes both ways. And with myself, what I found out, the more I was able to accept all the negative um attributes or names that was given to me by the person that I harmed or their family rather, it allowed me to show me how much I need to grow, right? And I knew, and like I say, I understand the notion of revenge, right? And I say I understand it because that's a natural reaction. However, I understand when we coming for healing purposes, right? And this is what the victim impact really supposed to do is allow the individual to see with the harm that you caused and how it affect others. So naturally, after our own emotions, right? Because we go through the same emotional, it's just on a different spectrum. Maybe sometimes it's in denial, state of denial, or we like to play the blame game, like Ricardo said. But at the end of the day, when we go and close them doors and we log in at night, we got to deal with ourselves. So the reason why I say it's necessary, and like I said, they have videotapes, but there's nothing like that emotion, like you said, that raw emotion and energy, right? And
Hmm.
of the individual who actually been harmed, speaking it, and you taking onus of that and understand, okay, this is closure for me too, because that's not what's happening to us when we get incarcerated. When we get incarcerated, it's more harm, right? It's more damage.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Ricardo actually addresses your question a little bit in the next soundbite. Because I asked him, how do you go about So in the previous interview, he was talking about people initially are not ready for the victim impact class because they're still making excuses. They're still
Okay.
deflecting. They're still
Right.
deflecting.
Right.
Once they can get to the point of starting to realize, okay, wait a minute, I need to look at my own responsibility in this, then they're ready for this class. And that's why nobody, I mean, Ricardo, I think, said, that it took him 11 years before he took the class. But what's interesting is, so you'll hear him talk about trying to get the guys to realize all the ripple effects of their crime. And I have to tell you, one of the reasons why More Than Our Crimes exists is that people learn and relate through stories.
Mm.
Stories is what, I mean, you can talk about statistics, and it sort of leaves people cold. But when we hear a story like yours, a personal story, with all the little details that make you real and human and we relate to you, it's like your heart sort of stops and then you're really listening. And when you hear Ricardo talk about the types of ripple effects he gets the guys to think about, it would be much stronger if it wasn't like the guys saying it to themselves. But to hear about those ripple effects through a story, a personal story, by the person directly impacted, would be much more effective. But so Ricardo's going to talk a little bit about how he tries to talk about ripple effects in the class.
The whole thing about victim impact is trying to get them to see how the ripple effect of their actions affects everybody. Once you can do that, then we can start opening up a general conversation about how we affect them, hurting the victim's family, hurting your family, hurting society, emotionally, physically, financially, getting them to see that when you throw that rock in the pond, that ripple effect, it hits everybody. So if I could get a brother to see that if you burn the store down, and that's the store that your mother got to go to get her medicine every morning, maybe you would be reluctant to burn that store down. And that's the basis of victim impact, showing someone how you affect everybody, because a lot of us don't look at it and see that we affect not only ourselves, but the community, the school, the corner store. We affect everybody. Even if I steal your car, I'm affecting the brother trying to get up and go to work in the morning because he has 5 kids. He got to pay his bills. And he got to spend more money because guess what? He got to take the bus and maybe in the subway.
I also asked Ricardo how the victim impact class has helped him personally. And I think he was quite eloquent about that. Let's take a listen.
Well, it really helped me as far as me internalizing my whole life and my actions and deeds, and put me on a path to right my wrongs and see things from other people's point of view. In Southeast, when I was a little kid, all we used to do was throw rocks at buses and cars and stuff, and I used to hide my hands like I ain't did it. And it carried on through life because I was quick to throw a rock and hide my hand, and that equates to not taking your responsibility. So throughout the time that I took victim impact, I learned to accept my responsibility for my actions, and then I began to build my character again, because it takes a lifetime to build a character, but only a moment to destroy it. And I destroyed my character. It's been a long journey, but I've forgiven myself, and I hope one day the people who I hurt, especially my family, can forgive me.
So Ricardo talked to me about something I hadn't really thought of before, and that is none of this reflection on your impact and taking responsibility can be possible without first forgiving yourself and learning to love yourself. And I really had not considered that. And I'm curious, Conrad, what you think about that, and is that a necessary first step, and what does that process look like?
Um, for me personally, forgiving myself, it took time. I think the process went to giving yourself purpose. But for me, my heart was heavy. Like, I don't, nothing happens in a vacuum, right? So during this tragic uh, point in my life, I had to really like dig deep and try to understand that, man, like this is not who I am. Regardless of the all the negative names they try to attribute to me because of the crime, I always understood that I was better than that. So I think the love process, the love of yourself come in by actually doing something about yourself, right? And what I mean by doing something about yourself, meaning I told you I came in, I was a functional illiterate, so education was a priority on my mind. I define myself by my own by my own names, right? Through the own acronyms that I gave myself. You know what I'm saying? The shorthand, look. But through it all, forgiveness is it's a journey. It doesn't happen because you got to live with that for the rest of your life. And I told myself that. So by me living with this tragedy for the rest of my life, I do the work of trying to stop others from having to feel the same pain because I think the notion is that we don't hurt or we are not suffering from our crimes outside of the physical confinement, but we're suffering, emotionally, mentally, like any other person would suffer during a tragedy.
So now that it also made me think about, since they're working on trying to recognize the impact they have on other people, what does forgiveness look like? I mean, do you feel like you could forgive? You can, you have, or you could the person who took away your husband? And what does that mean, really, forgiveness?
I think it is possible to forgive. Um, I don't think I ever needed to forgive the young man who killed Lasana because I never ever hated him. But that's just me. I never hated him. I never put much energy toward him. In the beginning, I did what I felt was necessary because it was a murder case, right? And we were called by the ADA to come in. And so I was going through the motions of the process that was put before me. And I was young too. I was 26 years old. So it took some time of just navigating it to understand that I don't necessarily have to participate in this process. It's not a requirement. I have a choice in the matter of participating in the entire process, including the forgiveness process, right? And I think for me, because of the kind of person that I am, like I said, it's just a little bit my nature, and also some great advice that I received from a colleague who's like a second mom to me, who was with me at work uh, prior to, I think the day prior to me having to go to one of the court hearings in the aftermath of all this. And she said she saw my nervousness, and she was asking me what I was nervous about, and I was nervous about internalizing because of how I am, and seeing this person for the first time, the perpetrator, for lack of a better word, for the first time, and never being able to forget their face. And she just said, "Don't don't look at him. Just don't look at him." And that's the best advice I ever received from anyone around this, was not to look at him. And it wasn't just because I don't know what he looks like. I literally don't know what he looks like, maybe not even the back of his head for real, because I just kept looking down, but because it also was the it was the spark that led me to not pay attention to him overall, right? Not pay attention to him, not make it about him. And so yeah, he has my forgiveness because I never really made it about him. And I also learned some things about his upbringing or lack of upbringing, and, things he was exposed to: broken home, incarcerated father, mother on drugs, lead poisoning, so many cousins being raised by a grandparent who probably had too much on her plate. And this is not to make excuses ever, because other people who've been impacted by something similar may feel that way. Wait a minute, you taking their side? No, I'm in reality. I'm in reality that these are the things that lead people to have, whether it be mental illness or, trauma, or lack of self-awareness, lack of self-identity, lack of um, empathy or feeling for other people. If you don't love yourself, if you don't care about yourself, if you haven't been taught to prioritize your own needs, why would you care about somebody else, right? And so I'm just in reality about that. And I can forgive those things absolutely, because I can forgive them in other people. Why can't I forgive them in the situation where the situation is close to me or has impacted me, right? But you have a question.
I was saying that that's special because there are other people who go the other way, I mean, I just when you were talking, I flashed back. There's a friend of mine who is in prison, life without parole, and he's turned to this wonderful, wonderful person. And I've been racking my brains about how to get him a rehearing in some way to say he's ready to go home after more than 30 years. And I maybe I shouldn't have done this, but I called a woman who was there when her partner was killed.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as she heard his name, this is more than 30 years, more than 30, she said he can burn in hell with such anger and wrath that it was like it had just happened. Like she had not moved on. The anger.
Mm.
So your attitude, I mean, a lot of people, the revenge is that desire for,
Mm-hmm.
they have made it about him.
Yeah, I
It's
understand that
special.
revenge though. I was in that place.
Yeah.
It's work. Even forgiving yourself is work. You can forgive yourself for having done something and then you get re-triggered and then you hate yourself again and then you have to do the work all over again of forgiving yourself. It's work. So I I can't blame that person. I don't say that I'm completely separate from that person. I understand that too. I understand that rage, that emotion of like, wait a minute, my loved one will never come back.
Yeah.
And so why then should I give any grace to someone who is still living and who maybe has a chance to see the light of day again or even gets to feel the sun rays on their cheek through a prison cell? My husband will never feel the sun ray on his, whatever it is, right? I understand that too. And I think that's a very valid emotion. Emotions are valid. I think the conversation about forgiveness and who that person is today are two separate conversations, though. That was the but that I was about to say before you asked that question. I think it's my business if I forgive the individual who killed my husband and nobody else's. No one should judge me for it. No one should even expect it, though. It's my business. It was my own internal process that I needed for myself.
Mm.
To me, forgiveness is release. So I needed to
Mhm.
release myself from it, but it doesn't release him from anything. Now he is on his own path. That is not my business as to whether or not he is growing and evolving. And that's for him to decide. And in terms of whether or not he's ever released on parole or, he's granted release on his due date, that's a conversation for the powers that be to have about, whether this person is no longer a danger to society and really should be released and be able to live a new life and enjoy freedom, right? To me, those are two separate conversations. I think maybe for sure, he needs to forgive himself. Probably he needs forgiveness from his own family and his own community because we're social creatures and we live amongst one another and we don't thrive by ourselves. And so you do need that acceptance and that embrace from the people that are going to be in your life. But
Yeah.
does he need it from me? I'm not in his life and he's not in my life. I don't think so. I don't think that it's my place to forgive him, nor do I think he deserves or has the right to ask it from me. I think it is an individual process for each one of us. Our paths cross on one day, on one instance, and the rest is history. But that is my feeling about it. Yeah, that's not to say that that's how somebody else who's been impacted by something similar should feel. I would never dictate or imply how somebody else should feel,
Yeah.
but this is my journey because I really don't want my life to be defined by this one thing. And I also similarly don't believe that someone who has committed a crime, whether they're incarcerated for it or not, because that's another conversation, should be defined by their one act. If they've changed, if they've grown, they're still living, they still have something to give. I want this young man to contribute to society in a different way. It would be the greatest joy of my life to know that he is far removed from that young 15-year-old and that he's a completely different person, that he's somebody that I could literally sit down next to, like I'm sitting down next to Conrad. I'm not saying you did anything like that. I'm just saying like it would give me so much joy and it would be such a beautiful thing for me to know that that's his former life. All those cells have died. He's a new person. And I may never know that, but that's what I want for anyone who's done something. We're all here to live and grow and learn from our experiences and grow our soul before we leave here and leave with some lessons. And I don't think anybody should be robbed of that, even people who have committed violent crimes.
Well, that's a very special attitude, and I'm very appreciative of you. And so was Ricardo. I shared with him how his interview was going to be used, and I shared with him who else was going to be on the show, including your story. And I wanted to play for you his response.
Uh, that's a hard one there. Because we like to say time heals wounds, but it doesn't. There's no time to heal that wound like that when you lose somebody special like that. But the only thing I could tell her is I admire her, first and foremost. And I understand her grief as well, because on one hand, she don't want to see this person do a lot of time, but on the other hand, she don't want her husband forgotten. And it takes a special person to forgive. Forgiveness is not for the person who victimized you. Forgiveness is for her, so she can move on in her life and not to be bitter and angry and consumed with revenge. You know, hate, which can eat you up inside, and that's hard pill to swallow because everybody can't forgive. I understand the tug of war between the good and evil. And hopefully one day she can find it in herself. If I was her, I want to meet this person.
Mm.
That's me. And I also want to see if this person has forgiven themselves for taking another life. I want to see how this person living right now. I don't care how much of a killer you are or how crazy you are. At the end of the day, everybody knows right from wrong. And I knew right from wrong. But forgiveness is hard. It took me almost 27, 28 years to forgive myself for taking somebody's life. And I still feel the guilt and shame sometimes. You done took a life, and that's not me. I'm not no Jason or but I think everybody has some redeeming qualities in them. But they got to work hard. It's not easy because you can't get somebody back in life.
Yeah.
So it's something I got to live with for the rest of my life. So for me, I try to be the best person I can be each and every day.
So I think that's a good note to close out this episode. I hope that everybody who's listening or watching finds it as thought-provoking as we did, and will maybe like discuss it over dinner with their friends and family. And meanwhile, please follow and subscribe to our podcast and share it with others. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you, Conrad.
Thank you.